Alright everybody, welcome to another Cadillac video. So I know this is long in coming, so this one's going to be kind of long, but I have a lot of explaining to do. So first, if you look at the motor, ta-da, well it looks a little bit different than last time you saw it. Yes, the dual quads are gone. Don't worry, I didn't sell them, I didn't get rid of them. All I did was replace them, and I'll tell you why. Okay, so first I figured out that I had an intake leak. I had a cylinder that was missing because it was getting too much air. Now, here is how I knew I had an intake leak. So let's pretend this is the dual quad intake. I would spray carburetor cleaner right down here where this intake runner is, and every time I did that, the RPM would go up. I also used this temp gun right here. I also used that here on the exhaust manifold. What I was getting was, in these middle two, I was getting 400 something degrees. Same one with this one, but this one right here barely broke 200. I think it was like a 260, 275, so this cylinder was missing completely. If you remember the last video, you know, the engine was shaking, it was bouncing all up and down, it just wasn't working right. So I decided, let's go ahead and just swap out the intake. The way I see it, yes, I will agree with you 100%. It is not as cool with only one carburetor. It's much cooler with the two and the bat wing, and it looks really cool. But I've been talking to a lot of people that actually own these kind of cars, and what they say is dual carbs are for shows and trailer queens, and single cars are for drivers, which is what I want to do with this car. I've had it for 2 years, and I've barely driven it at all. So I wanted something that was reliable. I wanted something that I could use on a daily basis, or at least close to it. And an Edelbrock 1406 is about as simple as any carburetor can get. So I had to do a couple interesting things to make it fit. One, I had to get a spacer because there's the small square bore from the 50s and then the larger square bore from the mid-60s on up. So I had to get that spacer too. Thank you, Ryan, for providing that. Also, interesting thing is this intake, I had to buy that intake, and I had to buy a different throttle rod since everything is different from the intake up when it comes to duals versus single carbs. So, and I rebuilt the carburetor and put it all back to stock spec. So I haven't run it at all. What we're going to do is fire it up and see, we're going to check temperature, and we're going to see if I have that intake leak still. I'm pretty sure it will work, and I'll tell you the reason why. If you remember in the last video, I took that intake and I rocked it back and forth across the heads, and it just didn't sit right. This one, on the other hand, doesn't do that. It just sits down on it, and it doesn't have a problem. So I guess we'll go ahead and see what happens. So the transmission lever on these things is really finicky, so let's see if it will shift with the way we got it. Ooh. Still makes that awful noise. Well, doesn't want to go into a different gear. It runs really great, but there's the C4. Got time to mess with that transmission. It's adjustable, so it's called the TV rod. Tells the car when to shift, but it should have shifted by now. So we're gonna have to adjust that, but it sure runs a heck of a lot better than it did. Parking this thing is real fun. Carburetor needs tuned, but hey, I like that. Alright, so this is your TV rod, and it connects to your throttle, but basically what it does, I think, is since there's no vacuum to this transmission, based on your throttle position it tells the transmission when to shift. So what I've had to do is get a coupler and make it a little bit longer than normal, just because it's a little different than the stock setup. I also believe I can play around with the throttle, this throttle lever and this TV rod. You can switch them around and make one shorter, make one longer, that kind of thing, in order to get the transmission shift. I know it did shift before. The weird part, it whined less, so I don't know. But definitely a step farther on the Cadillac. I'm going to go ahead and buy an air cleaner for it, and I'll paint it gold so it matches. But the transmission fluid was full, as you saw earlier in this video. I didn't need to add any, so I think it needs to get that adjusted. I need to play around with that one way or the other and see what I need to do. So, alright guys, well thanks for watching this video, and more to come.